sun had scarcely risen over the plains of Canaan when the army of Israel stopped, frozen in horror. On the horizon, enormous figures loomed like colossal shadows against the dawn light. Each step made the earth tremble, raising dust and dread, and the wind seemed to carry ancient whispers of warning. They were Anakins, direct descendants of the Nephilim, giants who survived the destruction that God brought upon the earth. Their eyes shone with an ancient strength, and their presence was not merely physical. It was the living reminder of a cursed heritage that should have been forgotten forever. The soldiers knew even without words. This was no ordinary confrontation. Every encounter with these creatures would be different, a battle against the impossible, a test of courage, faith and survival in the face of beings whose strength and malice echoed the very wrath of the past. In this video, you'll delve into one of the darkest chapters of biblical history, when Israel approached lands still marked by pre-flood terror. We'll reveal who were the Anakins, the giants who walked the earth after the waters of the flood receded. They descended directly from the Nephilim, and their survival remains shrouded in mystery. How did these forbidden lineages manage to escape the destruction decreed by God? You'll find out. The close relationship between the Anakins and the original Nephilim, the descendants of the Watchers who had corrupted humanity. Ancient texts and forgotten traditions suggest that they were not only physical survivors, but bearers of a cursed spiritual heritage, a shadow of the corruption that nearly destroyed Earth. We will reveal why was Israel afraid to confront these giants, and accounts from the early expeditions indicate the terrifying strength and surprising military strategy of the Anakins. It wasn't just physical battle. Each encounter represented a spiritual challenge, capable of shaking the faith and morale of the chosen people. You will understand the psychological and spiritual impact, the impact their presence had on neighboring peoples, cities dominated by fear, entire tribes subjected to the silent tyranny of giants, and a moral corruption that persisted even after the flood. And finally, let's explore vestiges and traditions which indicate that the nefarious lineage of the Nephilim did not end with the death of Og. Some archaeological fragments, ancient inscriptions, and oral accounts suggest that the Anakim continued to influence the earth, leaving marks that would resonate for generations. Prepare to discover how the Israelite army confronted the last shadow of the pre-flood giants, and how these beings became legends that still challenge history and human faith today. Before we continue, take a quick break. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. What you are about to see is no ordinary story. We are delving into rare texts, forgotten traditions, and forbidden records that have almost disappeared over time. Each fragment reveals secrets that defy comprehension and expose truths that many have tried to conceal. Supporting the channel isn't just about following a page. It's about helping to keep alive these narratives that history has tried to silence. By subscribing, you ensure that these hidden stories from the Bible, the Anakim, the Nephilim, and the mysteries they carry, continue to be revealed, illuminating a dark past that still echoes in the present. Now, prepare yourself. What comes next is the true face of the earth that Israel feared to cross, where giants walked and the impossible became reality. The earth, still damp from the flood, was slowly beginning to rebuild itself. Canaan, a promised land, was now revealing itself in shades of hope and fear. Rivers regained their flow, carrying sediment and memories of destruction. Young forests swayed in silent winds, as if whispering stories of a past that no one should forget. Scattered tribes attempted to erect villages and camps, rebuilding houses of mud and wood, while watchful eyes scanned the hills for danger. But there was something that no amount of reconstruction could erase: the shadow of two giants. In the deep valleys between mountains and cliffs, colossal figures roamed. Their footsteps were heard even before they were seen, making the ground tremble and the human heart freeze. They were not mere men or animals. They were remnants of a forgotten age, carrying the blood of the Nephilim, with bodies and strengths that defied nature and human logic itself. The villages lived under constant tension. Children learned to fear the echoes of heavy footsteps in the hills. Hunters dreaded going out to hunt. Warriors trained without knowing if they were prepared to face beings capable of crushing walls with a single blow. And above all, there was the silence. The feeling that in any shadow, in any valley, the harmful presence of the Anakins could emerge. The atmosphere of Canaan was heavy, laden with mystery and imminent danger. Every wind that blew across the plains seemed to carry ancient whispers, warnings from a world that had not been fully purified. The sky, clear during the day, concealed clouds that, at dusk, formed unsettling silhouettes, almost human, yet disproportionate, reminding everyone that human survival there depended not only on courage, but also on faith and cunning. It was a rebuilt world, but marked by invisible wounds. A land trying to be reborn, but where the ghosts of the past walked openly and the impossible still breathed on the hills. In the heart of Canaan, Israel faced not only unknown lands, it confronted a living threat from the past, the Anakim. These giants were direct descendants of the Nephilim, survivors of the destruction that God had imposed on earth before the flood. It wasn't just physical strength. They carried with them a corrupted spiritual heritage, echoes of the Watchers' rebellion, whose presence continued to distort the human world. The Anakim were more than warriors. They were walking symbols of the power that should have been eradicated forever. Each giant reminded Israel that pre-flood evil had not been completely eradicated. Their colossal bodies and supernatural resilience made any physical confrontation a nearly impossible task, but their influence went beyond the flesh. Their mere presence contaminated the morals of neighboring tribes, spreading fear, submission, and the seeds of ancient practices that God had condemned. Accounts from villages and early skirmishes show that the Anakins did not need to attack to dominate. The fear of their arrival made men and women bow down, abandoning cities and cults, and sometimes offering tribute merely to appease the evil they represented. Every shadow that moved across the hills carried the weight of a lineage that had nearly destroyed humanity and that now breathed again over Canaan. For Israel, the problem was twofold. Physically, they faced giants with superhuman strength, capable of crushing walls and soldiers with ease. Spiritually, they confronted the vivid memory of ancient sin, the nefarious corruption that seeped into hearts and minds, threatening God's mission to establish a just and faithful land. The danger of the Anakins could not be ignored. They were the last bridge between the world before the flood and the world God wished to purify. Defeating them would not only be a military victory, but an act of divine justice, the final eradication of a lineage that should never have survived. The Anakins didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were the product of a legacy. Damn, the result of the nefarious blood that survived the flood and infiltrated carefully preserved human families. As the world rose from the waters, certain lineages carried in their DNA the strength and corruption of the Nephilim, genetic memories of a rebellion that God deemed necessary to eradicate. Each Anakin was born with the weight of this heritage, capable of bending human nature to their advantage and silently transmitting a harmful influence to subsequent generations. It wasn't just genetics that kept them dangerous. Fragments of ancient texts and forgotten traditions suggest that the Anakins benefited from supernatural protections, almost invisible, which kept them out of reach of divine destruction. Some accounts suggest that certain artifacts, inherited or constructed from knowledge left by the Watchers, functioned as talismans of power and survival. Others mention sacred caves and hidden locations where they were instructed in ancient magic, sorcery, and forbidden rituals, teachings that made them not only physically gigantic, but beings that are almost invincible in the eyes of humans. Furthermore, There are legends that say these giants possessed a direct connection to the secrets of the heavens, corrupt astrology, rituals to prolong life, methods of predicting conflicts, and manipulation of nature. Each Anakin carried the living memory of the Watchers, adapted and diluted, but still powerful. Thus, the survival of this lineage was not a mere historical accident, but a combination of nefarious blood, ancestral knowledge, and mystical protection, which allowed the Anakins to re-emerge as a tangible and spiritual threat. Therefore, for Israel, facing the Anakins was not just fighting giants of flesh and blood. It was confronting the echoes of a corrupted past, a legacy of a world that God had judged, but which still insisted on remaining among the living. Each step of these giants upon Canaan was a silent reminder that the purification of the world had not been complete, and that ancient evil still found ways to persist through the nefarious lineage of the Anakim. The arrival of the Anakins in Canaan was not just a physical challenge, it was a spiritual and moral storm which devastated everything around it. Entire tribes, which had previously maintained traditions and cults, began to live in constant terror, abandoning sacred rituals and bowing before the colossal power of these giants. Each step of an Anakin on Earth not only crushed rocks and houses, but also shattered human morality, spreading fear and submission. The cities that were once centers of life and commerce quickly became shadows of their former selves. Oppressed peoples were forced to pay tribute, give up their children, or participate in rituals that reflected the same perverse cult of the pre-flood Nephilim. Violence became routine, and bloodshed a silent necessity for survival. The presence of the Anakins transformed daily life into a game of terror, where courage was constantly tested and hope diminished with each passing day. But the impact wasn't just physical. Harmful spiritual influence. The influence of these giants contaminated people's consciousness. Ancient legends and fragmented accounts indicate that they maintained corrupt practices inherited from the Watchers, teachings on witchcraft, perverse astrology, and dark rituals that corrupted the human spirit. Each city they visited was plunged into moral decay, as if the very presence of the Anakins provoked an invisible contagion of perversion, fear, and despair. The power of the Anakins made any isolated resistance impossible. Tribes that tried to remain faithful to tradition were destroyed or assimilated. Entire cultures began to forget their roots, replacing faith and ethics with survival and fear. The evil they carried was subtle, but devastating. It destroyed not only bodies, but distorts the human soul, ensuring that the post-flood world remained at the mercy of the nefarious legacy that God had tried to eradicate. Thus, the Anakins were not just giants of flesh and blood, they were catalysts for corruption and decay, reminding Israel and all neighboring peoples that the flood had wiped out the ancient world, but had not completely eradicated the legacy of the Nephilim. Each of their presences in Canaan was a warning. Ancient evil could still walk among men. The Anakins were not just giants of brute strength, they were bearers of forbidden wisdom, a legacy passed down by the Nephilim who walked the earth before the flood. Their colossal bodies were accompanied by a mastery of weapons, tactics, and rituals that surpassed any human capacity. It wasn't just physical combat, it was the application of knowledge that human nature itself could never conceive on its own. Bows that launched arrows with deadly precision at impossible distances, spears reinforced with metals that no one else knew how to forge, and armor that could withstand blows from hundreds of men simultaneously were just the tip of the iceberg. Cities that resisted human invasions succumbed to attacks planned by beings who possessed strategies inherited from supernatural ancestors, capable of predicting movements and manipulating terrain to their advantage. But the real threat lay in rituals and spiritual knowledge that circulated among them. Ancient texts and fragments of forgotten traditions mentioned sorcery that could alter the perception of enemies, manipulate the minds of entire tribes, and even mysteriously prolong life. Some Anakins were initiated from a young age into practices that mixed astrology, invocation of hidden forces, and spiritual warfare techniques inherited from the Watchers, making them almost invincible. Furthermore, the Anakins kept alive the memory of ancient constructions and engineering. Cities, walls, and fortifications built under their guidance were designed to withstand centuries, combining physical and supernatural knowledge. Each attack was calculated with near scientific precision, each defense enhanced by traditions that had survived the flood. The combination of superhuman strength, clever tactics, advanced weapons, and forbidden magic. It created a being that could not be confronted by ordinary soldiers. The Anakins were, therefore, the personification of the pre-flood era, a threat that walked among humans, keeping alive the memory of the power and corruption of the Nephilim. Those who encountered them were not merely facing giants, they were confronting the very legacy of ancient evil, a force that history had not yet managed to erase. The presence of the Anakins brought to Earth a state of absolute chaos, a destruction that went beyond the physical and penetrated the very essence of humanity. Entire tribes were obliterated, villages burned, and cities abandoned, while giants dominated entire territories with force and cunning. It was not just about violence. It was the establishment of a corrupt order where the law of the strongest replaced traditions, justice, and faith. Fear was the currency. Peoples who had once been guided by sacred principles and cults bowed down, offering tributes or practicing distorted rituals to appease the fury of the Anakim. Moral decay spread like a disease. Murders, sacrifices, and ancient practices of the Nephilim resurfaced, infecting communities and leaving a legacy of spiritual perversion that transformed each conquered territory into an extension of ancestral corruption. Bloodshed was constant. Stories tell of stained rivers, abandoned fields, and children growing up under the shadow of giants who decided the fate of men and women for the simple desire for power or entertainment. The psychological impact was devastating. The mere presence of an Anakin was enough to break the resistance of warriors, erode the faith of leaders, and spread terror among neighboring tribes. The threat was not just military, but spiritual. The Anakins carried on practices and rituals inherited from the Watchers, manipulating fear and human morality, shaping societies in the image of an ancient corruption. Each generation tainted by their deeds perpetuated a nefarious shadow that threatened to make the moral decay of Earth permanent. Given this scenario, it became inevitable that Israel would confront the Anakins. It was not a simple military conquest. It was a divine necessity, a confrontation required to preserve the spiritual and physical order promised by God. Overthrowing the giants meant not only victory over colossal bodies, but also the end of the nefarious influence that threatened post-flood humanity, ensuring that divine justice could finally begin to flourish again among the peoples of the earth. Although the Anakins were confronted by the army of Israel, the story does not end with their defeat. Ancient texts, fragments of forgotten traditions, and nearly erased inscriptions suggest that this nefarious lineage has not been completely eradicated. Some accounts speak of giants who hid in the mountains, in deep caves, or in unexplored regions, surviving in secret, waiting for the right moment to emerge again. Archaeological evidence, though scarce, indicates traces of colossal constructions and tools that could not have been made by ordinary humans, suggesting that hidden descendants of the Anakins continued to exist, preserving ancient knowledge and practices. Oral legends among remote tribes also recount encounters with figures of unusual proportions, with abilities reminiscent of the powers attributed to the Nephilim and their descendants. Furthermore, mystical traditions and apocryphal texts suggest that some bloodlines were deliberately preserved or protected by supernatural forces, as if the nefarious blood had been placed under surveillance. allowing the Anakins to continue to exert influence in a discreet but persistent manner. These traces indicate that the threat was not merely physical. The spiritual and genetic shadow of the Nephilim could echo through the generations, infiltrating human cultures, governments, and societies in subtle yet profound ways. Therefore, the story of Moses confronting the Anakins is just the beginning of a broader narrative, a line connecting the pre-flood past to the post-flood world, and possibly to the present. What you will see in the next video will challenge the idea that the giants disappeared over time. On the contrary, signs and traces suggest that the nefarious legacy still roams the earth, ready to manifest itself in ways that few dare to imagine. Prepare to follow hidden trails, uncover forgotten lineages, and understand how the nefarious presence of the giants may have left invisible marks that echo into the modern era. The confrontation with the Anakins has ended physically, but the spiritual and historical battle continues. It's far from over.